Before getting into my sermon this morning, there's something I want to say, which I was going to say last Sunday, but I didn't know how much breath I'd have, so I wanted to save every breath. And that was a good idea because by the end of the prayer, the pastoral prayer, that was breath number whatever, and there wasn't one after that. So, but this morning, better. Anyway, what I wanted to say is, I can't tell you how good it feels to be standing up here and preaching again from this pulpit. I just can't even begin to tell you. The other thing I wanted to tell you occurred to me while I was preaching, given the look on the face of more than a few of you. You had a look like you were just waiting for me to collapse or run out of breath. And I was going to stop and say, don't worry, we'll make it. So you don't have to have that look this morning, all right? Good. Well, anyway, some years back, during the course of a conversation, somebody asked me, why is it so hard for people to be kind? Now, the guy was really frustrated. He'd run into person after person who'd been rude or inconsiderate, even hostile. He tried to resolve a billing dispute with a major corporation, which was clearly in error. But the corporate representative was very abrupt, actually tried to place the blame on him, treated him with contempt, and demanded that he pay for their mistake. A fellow worker simply grunted when the man said good morning to him. And when the man asked if he was all right, the co-worker nearly took his head off. Later in the day, the co-worker made some nasty reply to a simple question the man asked. Even a friend was inconsiderate and thoughtless. What really gets you, he said, is that after a while, you don't even feel like a human being when you're treated like that. You feel like you're some kind of thing or object. It's a miserable feeling. And then he said, a little kindness can make all the difference in the world. And so he asked, but why is it so hard for people to be kind? It's a good question, actually, because in truth, it's a religious question, a spiritual question, to be precise. At least that's the way the Apostle Paul sees it. In our second lesson for today, Paul lists kindness as one of the fruits of the Spirit. In other words, kindness doesn't come naturally. It's something the Spirit works in and through us, and it's a telltale sign that the Spirit is alive and well in somebody. Even more, kindness for Paul is one thing it means to be like Christ. And for Paul, that's the point of the whole show, to grow up into the fullness of the measure of the stature of Christ, to become a real human being, like Christ himself was a real human being. And to be a real human being is to recognize others as human beings, who have the same thoughts and feelings and hopes and fears and hurts that we all of us do. To treat others with the very same thoughtfulness and consideration and compassion that we ourselves want to be treated with. To be gracious and merciful and build others up, not tear them down. It's to be human to others, just as Christ was human to others. But the thing is, kindness takes some work. More than we realize, kindness has to do with conscious choice, training, and discipline. Actually stopping and thinking. It has to do with allowing the Spirit to do some work within us. Now, what in the world do I mean by that? Well, maybe the best thing to do would be to take a look at the day in the life of a person who doesn't seem to be very kind. The person I'm thinking of is the person who, when you greet him or her, say, hello, hey, good morning, basically responds, either verbally or non-verbally, drop dead. It's the person in whose presence you feel like a slug, whom you walk away from feeling worthless and insignificant and torn down. Now, why is it so hard for that person to be kind? What happens to that person? And I thought maybe if we took a look at a day in the life of that person and could kind of freeze frame his life at this point and that, it might provide an answer to the question and help us in our struggle to be kind. Now, the most critical moment in this person's day is the moment he or she wakes up out of the huge crevices of the night. That's where you freeze the frame, right there. What is his first thought? What floods in on him? And how does he choose to respond? What does he do at that moment? I once asked my Sunday school class many years ago that question. What's the first thought that comes in the morning? Ben Caton, whom some of you may remember, answered that the first thing he felt when he woke up was surprise. He was always surprised and amazed that he woke up at all. He had survived a devastating stroke and other illnesses as well. And he felt that by all rights, he should have been dead. So he was always surprised to wake up. And when he did, his first conscious thought was to give thanks for the new day. Because for Ben, he knew that it was a gift. Of course, even for the youngest and most healthy among us, each day is a gift. But chances are, it's not thanks we give, unless we consciously choose to see it that way. Actually stop and think about it. The first moment is a moment of choice, decision, and it affects the entire day. A lot of miserable days begin right there. And a lot of misery for others originates there too. It's a moment of choice, and the choice is whether we allow the Spirit in or allow everything else to flood in. Now back to the person who in so many words tells us to drop dead. I'm afraid at that critical moment, he's allowed everything else to flood in. And what does flood in? Well, I really can't say for sure. Maybe he's miserable on the job, or miserable at home. Maybe he's bored to tears with his life. Or maybe it's self-doubts or fears or worries that rush him, or anger, or bitterness. You know, a lot of people actually wake up angry. And before their feet hit the floor, the old bitternesses and resentments come alive within. Now, anger and bitterness can sour a person, really sour a person. And everyone in that person's path can be soured as well by that person's sourness. So maybe that's what's got our friend. This much is clear. He's chosen not to push back all that starts to rise with him, not to allow the Spirit in, not to think about the day in any other way as just another lousy day. To allow the Spirit in is actually to push it all back and allow different thoughts in, to allow thankfulness. But our friend doesn't. So right off the bat, the odds are pretty good that somebody's going to be told to drop dead. And yet there's still hope for our friend. Fast forward to breakfast, and then freeze the frame there, just as he's slurping his coffee. His shower in the bright morning have refreshed him a little, and he thinks about one of his children, or remembers the nice words somebody had for him the day before, or recalls something he read, and he smiles. Then the thought of what the day holds comes to mind. The meetings, demands, expectations, or it's the thought of the argument he had yesterday, or that life hasn't turned out like he planned, or some hurtful memory that comes to mind. And once again, he chooses to allow anger or self-pity or disappointment to fill in. His smile fades, and he groans when he hears the traffic report on the morning news, and he heads out the door, mumbling under his breath. And right there, for a little training, a little discipline could have helped. We need to train ourselves to see the day in a certain way and look for the gifts hidden in the day. We need to discipline ourselves not to be so consumed with ourselves. We need to train and discipline ourselves to choose thoughts that open us to the day and to others. As we slurp our morning coffee, we need to allow something of God in. Unfortunately, our friend doesn't. So he heads out the door, as lost in himself as ever. Oh, by the way, the guy who wouldn't let you in when you were trying to merge, the guy who cut you off to get the parking space in the store when you wanted that space, the guy who let the door slam in your face, that's our guy. But we're not done with him yet. Believe it or not, he still has a chance. Now fast forward to where he's sitting at his desk or standing behind a counter talking on the phone. Now he's talking to somebody who has a problem. And in the distant recesses of his mind, he remembers a time when he himself faced a similar problem. He remembers how helpless he felt and how thoughtlessly he was treated. How a little kindness would have made such a difference. That's where you freeze the frame, right there. Now our guy has a decision to make. He can allow the thought of his own experience to create compassion within him, or he can ignore his remembrance and decide that since no one had shown him any consideration, there's no reason for him to show any either. It's one of those critical moments. Will he recognize the Spirit at work in bringing the memory of his own experience to mind? Or will he do what comes naturally? Or worse, will he tell the person that in some way that person's problems are far less than his problems? Even choose to lay his own problems and mood on the person? What will he do? Guess. What he does is to say to the person he's talking to, and then later to a co-worker, and later even to his own family, in so many words, just by his actions and mood and behavior. You guessed it. Oh, drop dead. But why? Why is it so hard for this guy to be kind? Not because he's incapable of being kind, but frankly because of a lack of thought, conscious choice, and decision. Or to put it another way, because he didn't even give the Spirit a shot at it to work some kindness in him. And you and I, we're each of us capable of great kindness. Kindness is chosen more than we realize. Being a full human being is itself a choice. Becoming a real human being has to do with those choices we make, everyday choices, throughout the day. And at every critical moment, the Spirit is there. The power and ability is there to work kindness in us, to help us grow up into Christ, to be something of Christ. And what a difference such kindness makes from the moment we wake up till the moment we fall asleep, and all the moments in between. Amen.